The distant howl of a coyote echoed through the canyon as Sheriff Samuel Rayburn stared down the barrel of his Colt .45, his eyes fixed on the wanted poster in his other hand. The man's face looked back at him, taunting him from the weathered paper that had traveled all the way from Santa Fe. Samuel had been tracking this outlaw for 3 weeks across the New Mexico territory, and now in the spring of 1879, he was close, so close he could almost taste the dust kicked up by the man's horse. Just a little farther, he muttered to himself, wincing as pain shot through his side. 3 days ago, he'd taken a tumble off his horse while crossing a ravine, landing hard on the rocky ground. The local doctor in the last town had told him what he already knew: cracked rib, possibly 2. Stay off your horse for at least 2 weeks, the doctor had advised. Samuel had nodded politely, paid his fee, and was back in the saddle before noon the next day. The sun was setting now, painting the desert landscape in fiery oranges and reds as he approached the small settlement of Willow Creek. It wasn't much: a general store, a saloon, a handful of houses, and a doctor's office, but it was civilization, and after weeks on the trail, even this modest outpost looked like paradise. As he rode into town, his horse's hooves kicking up dust on the main street, Samuel could feel eyes on him. Strangers weren't uncommon in these parts, but a man wearing a sheriff's badge always drew attention. He dismounted carefully outside the saloon, gritting his teeth against the stabbing pain in his side. "Easy now," he whispered to his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Copper. "We'll get some rest soon enough." The saloon was like 100 others he'd been in: dim lighting, the smell of whiskey and sweat, a piano playing in the corner. Samuel made his way to the bar, one hand pressed discreetly against his injured ribs. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, placing a coin on the worn wooden surface. "And information, if you've got it." The bartender, a burly man with a thick mustache, slid a glass toward him. "Information costs more than whiskey, Sheriff." Samuel placed another coin on the bar. "Man named Garrett Dixon. Word is he might be passing through these parts." The bartender pocketed the coins and leaned forward. "Haven't seen him myself, but there's talk of a stranger matching his description staying at the Willow Creek Ranch, just outside town. Place belongs to the Lawson widow." Samuel took a sip of his whiskey, considering this information. "Lawson widow? Delia Lawson. Husband died 2 years back. She runs the place on her own now, with help from a few hands." The bartender wiped down the bar with a rag. "Tough woman. Fair but tough." Samuel nodded his thanks and was about to ask another question when the saloon doors swung open and a woman strode in. The room didn't exactly fall silent, but there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere as heads turned to watch her. She was tall and straight-backed, wearing riding clothes, practical trousers, boots, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a practical braid, but a few strands had escaped to frame a face that might have been pretty if it weren't set in such a serious expression. She looked to be in her late 20s, with eyes that had seen their share of hardship. "Evening, Mrs. Lawson," called the bartender. "Evening, Tom," she replied, her voice clear and no nonsense. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Samuel, noting his badge. "You must be new in town, Sheriff." "Just passing through, madam," Samuel replied, tipping his hat. "Sheriff Samuel Rayburn." She approached him, her gait confident. "Delia Lawson. I own the ranch outside town." She gestured to the bartender for a drink. "What brings a sheriff to our little corner of nowhere?" Samuel hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "I'm tracking a man, outlaw named Garrett Dixon, wanted for robbery and murder in Santa Fe." Something flickered across Delia's face, too quick to read, but it was there. "Haven't heard the name," she said, accepting a glass from the bartender. "But Willow Creek isn't exactly on the main trail. Not many passing through who aren't looking for something." Samuel studied her face, trying to determine if she was lying. "The bartender seems to think he might be in the area." Delia shot a sharp look at the bartender, who suddenly became very interested in cleaning glasses. "Tom has a habit of talking too much." She turned back to Samuel. "If I see anyone matching your description, I'll let you know. The nearest sheriff's office is in Silver Springs, 3 days' ride from here." Samuel nodded, finishing his whiskey. As he set down his glass, he shifted wrong, and a jolt of pain from his ribs made him wince visibly. Delia's sharp eyes caught the movement. You're hurt. It's nothing, Samuel said, straightening up with effort. Just a little fall. A fall that broke something, from the look of it, Delia said, her tone practical. We have a doctor in town. Already saw one. Couple of cracked ribs. Nothing that won't heal. Delia's eyes narrowed slightly. And what did the doctor tell you to do about those ribs? Samuel gave her a wry smile. To stay off my horse for a couple of weeks. But I've got a job to do, madam. Well, Sheriff, Delia said, finishing her drink. I've got rooms for rent at my ranch, if you're looking for a place to stay while you're in the area. She set down her empty glass. Cheaper than the hotel, and my cook makes the best meals this side of the Mississippi. Samuel considered her offer. Staying at the Lawson Ranch would put him close to where Dixon might be hiding, and a few nights in a real bed wouldn't hurt his recovery. That's mighty kind of you, Mrs. Lawson. It's just good business, she replied, but there was something in her eyes that didn't quite match her businesslike tone. I'll be heading back shortly. You can follow along when you're ready. With that, she nodded to the bartender and left the saloon, leaving Samuel wondering what secrets Delia Lawson might be hiding behind those guarded eyes. The ride to the Lawson Ranch took about 20 minutes at a slow pace. Samuel followed Delia along a winding dirt road that led away from town, across a small creek, and up a gentle slope. As they crested the hill, the ranch came into view, a large main house built of sturdy logs, a barn, stables, and several smaller outbuildings spread across a clearing surrounded by pine trees. Beyond the buildings, Samuel could see fenced pastures where cattle grazed in the fading light. It's a fine spread you've got here, Mrs. Lawson, Samuel said as they approached. Built it from almost nothing with my husband, she replied, a touch of pride in her voice. When I came out here as a bride 10 years ago, there was just a one-room cabin and a dream. They dismounted in front of the stable, where a young ranch hand came out to take their horses. Samuel carefully swung his leg over Kappa's back, trying not to jar his ribs, but couldn't completely suppress a grimace of pain. Delia noticed, but said nothing as she led him toward the main house. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, polished wood floors, sturdy furniture, a large stone fireplace, and touches of feminine refinement in the curtains and quilts that softened the rustic structure. Jake, Delia called, and a middle-aged man with graying hair emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen. This is Sheriff Rayburn. He'll be staying with us for a few days. Can you show him to the guest room at the end of the hall? And let Martha know we have another for dinner. Yes, madam, Jake replied, giving Samuel a curious look before gesturing for him to follow. The guest room was simple but comfortable, a bed with a quilt, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the ranch yard. Jake set down Samuel's saddlebags and turned to leave. Dinner's in about an hour, Sheriff, he said. You might want to clean up. Pumps out back if you want fresh water. After Jake left, Samuel took stock of his surroundings. The room was clean, the bed looked comfortable, and for the first time in weeks, he'd be sleeping with a roof over his head. He unpacked his few belongings, then pulled out the wanted poster for Garrett Dixon. The man's face stared back at him, late 30s, dark hair, a scar across his left cheek. Dixon had robbed a bank in Santa Fe, killing 2 men in the process, one of them a friend of Samuel's. A promise to a dead man's widow had sent Samuel on this hunt, and he wasn't about to give up now, cracked ribs or not. After washing up and changing into his spare shirt, Samuel made his way to the dining room, where Delia was already seated at the head of a long wooden table. Jake was there too, along with 3 other men who Samuel assumed were ranch hands, and an older woman who must be Martha, the cook. Sheriff, Delia acknowledged him with a nod. Please, join us. Dinner was a hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from Delia's garden. The conversation flowed easily among the ranch hands, discussing the day's work and plans for tomorrow. Samuel observed, noting the easy way Delia interacted with her workers, respectful, but clearly in charge. So, Sheriff, one of the hands, a young man named Charlie, asked, what brings you all the way out here? Before Samuel could answer, Delia cut in. The sheriff is tracking an outlaw who might be in the area. I've offered him our hospitality while he conducts his search. The men exchanged glances, and Samuel couldn't help but notice the subtle tension that had entered the room. What's this outlaw done? Asked Jake, passing a bowl of potatoes. Robbery and murder in Santa Fe, Samuel replied, watching their reactions carefully. Man named Garrett Dixon. Don't reckon we've heard that name around these parts, said one of the other hands, not quite meeting Samuel's eyes. After dinner, as the hands returned to their bunkhouse, Delia invited Samuel to join her on the porch. The night was cool, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She handed him a cup of coffee, and they sat in rocking chairs, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Your men seemed a bit unsettled by the mention of Dixon, Samuel observed after a few moments of silence. Delia took a sip of her coffee before answering. People out here are wary of trouble, Sheriff. No one wants outlaws or lawmen stirring things up, including you. She turned to look at him, her face half illuminated by the light spilling from the window. I've worked hard for what I have. My husband and I built this place with our bare hands, and after he died, I've kept it going against all odds. So yes, I'm wary of anything that might threaten that. I'm not here to cause trouble for honest folk, Samuel assured her. Aren't you? Delia challenged. You ride into town, injured and exhausted, chasing a dangerous man. Trouble follows men like you, Sheriff Rayburn, whether you intend it or not. Samuel couldn't argue with her logic. Fair point, he conceded. But I gave my word to a widow that I'd bring her husband's killer to justice. Something in Delia's expression softened slightly. I understand keeping promises to the dead, she said quietly. But I wonder if your friend's widow asked you to risk your own life in the process. Some things are worth the risk, and some aren't, Delia countered. She stood, taking his empty cup. You should rest. Those ribs won't heal if you keep pushing yourself. She paused at the door. Breakfast is at sunrise. Good night, Sheriff. Good night, Mrs. Lawson, Samuel replied, watching her disappear into the house. He remained on the porch a while longer, contemplating the enigma that was Delia Lawson. There was more to her story than she was telling, and Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more about Garrett Dixon than she was letting on. The next morning, Samuel woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life, roosters crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, the clatter of activity in the kitchen. He dressed carefully, the pain in his side a constant reminder of his injury, and made his way to the dining table, where Delia and the hands were already eating breakfast. Morning, Sheriff, Delia greeted him. Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks, Samuel admitted, taking a seat. Thank you for your hospitality. Martha, the cook, placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits in front of him, along with a steaming cup of coffee. Eat up, Sheriff. You look like you could use some meat on those bones. After breakfast, Delia announced she'd be checking the north pasture fence line. There's a break somewhere, according to Jake, and we've had cattle straying onto Harrison's property. Mind if I ride along? Samuel asked. I'd like to get familiar with the area. Delia gave him an appraising look. With those ribs? You should be resting. I'll ride anyway, Samuel said with a determined smile. I've endured worse. Delia crossed her arms. Not while I'm watching, she said firmly. You'll tear something worse, and then where will you be? No use to your friend's widow or anyone else. Before Samuel could protest, she continued. I have a proposition for you, Sheriff. Stay here, rest those ribs for at least 3 days. In exchange, my men and I will keep our eyes and ears open for any sign of Dixon. If he's in the area, we'll find him. Samuel considered her offer. 3 days of rest would help his healing, and having local knowledge on his side could be invaluable. Still, he wasn't used to sitting idle while others did his job. And if I refuse? Then you're welcome to ride out now, but I won't be responsible for what happens when those ribs puncture something important, Delia replied bluntly. And you won't be welcome back. Samuel couldn't help but chuckle, which sent a stab of pain through his side. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Lawson. I didn't build this ranch by being soft, she returned, the ghost of a smile playing at her lips. Do we have a deal? Samuel nodded reluctantly. 3 days. But then I'm back in the saddle, cracked ribs or not. Fair enough, Delia agreed, extending her hand to seal the deal. As they shook hands, Samuel noticed a small scar on her wrist, just visible beneath her sleeve. It looked like a burn mark, old but still noticeable. She caught him looking and quickly withdrew her hand. I'll be back by sundown, she said, heading for the door. Jake will show you around if you're feeling up to it. Just don't overdo it. After Delia left, Samuel spent the morning exploring the ranch house and immediate surroundings, careful not to strain his injured side. The place was well maintained, with signs of both practical ranching knowledge and a woman's touch in the details. In the study, he found a photograph of a younger Delia with a tall, broad-shouldered man, her late husband, Samuel presumed. They looked happy, standing in front of what appeared to be the ranch house in an earlier stage of construction. There were other photographs too: Delia as a girl with what must be her parents, the completed ranch house, Delia with a group of ranch hands including Jake, who looked several years younger. That was taken 5 years ago. Jake's voice came from the doorway. Just after we finished the new barn. Samuel turned to face the foreman. You've been with Mrs. Lawson a long time? Since before her husband died, Jake confirmed. Mr. Lawson hired me when they first expanded the ranch. Good man. His death hit her hard. How did he die? Samuel asked. Jake's expression darkened slightly. Fever. Caught it in town and was gone within a week. Mrs. Lawson nursed him herself, day and night, but there was nothing to be done. He paused. Most folks expected her to sell up after that, maybe go back east to her family. But she's made of sterner stuff. So I'm learning, Samuel said thoughtfully. She seems to run a tight ship. That she does, Jake agreed. Fair but firm. No nonsense, but she treats us right. We'd ride through fire for her. There was a note of warning in his voice that Samuel didn't miss. I'm not here to cause trouble for Mrs. Lawson, Samuel assured him. I'm just after Dixon. Jake studied him for a moment, then nodded. Well, she asked me to show you around, if you're up to it. Nothing strenuous, just the main buildings. The tour took about an hour, with Jake pointing out the barn, stables, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and various other outbuildings that made up the working ranch. By the time they finished, Samuel's side was aching, and he was grateful when Jake suggested they sit on the porch with a glass of lemonade Martha had prepared. This is quite an operation Mrs. Lawson's running, Samuel observed, sipping the tart drink. One of the best-run ranches in the territory, Jake said with evident pride. We run about 500 head of cattle, plus some horses. Mrs. Lawson has an eye for good horse flesh. And yet she chooses to stay out here, miles from anywhere, running the place herself instead of remarrying, Samuel mused. Jake shot him a sharp look. Mrs. Lawson has had offers, plenty of them, but she values her independence. Can't say I blame her. Most men around these parts wouldn't take kindly to a wife who knows more about ranching than they do. Samuel held up a hand in a placating gesture. I meant no disrespect. I admire her determination. Jake seemed to relax slightly. She's one of a kind, that's for certain. As the day wore on, Samuel found himself increasingly curious about Delia Lawson. The more he learned, the more questions he had. Why was she so quick to offer him lodging? Was it just hospitality, or did she have another motive? And what was her reaction when he mentioned Dixon's name? By late afternoon, Samuel's ribs were throbbing, and he retired to his room to rest before dinner. As he lay on the bed, he heard riders approaching the house. Delia and her men returning from their day's work. From his window, he watched as she dismounted gracefully, handing the reins to one of the hands. She spoke to Jake briefly, then glanced up towards Samuel's window, as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met for a moment before Samuel drew back. That evening at dinner, Delia seemed preoccupied, participating in the conversation only when directly addressed. When the meal was finished, she invited Samuel to join her in the study. Whiskey, she offered, pouring herself a small glass from a decanter. Thank you. Samuel accepted, taking the glass she handed him. Delia settled into a leather chair opposite him. I've been thinking about this outlaw you're chasing, she said without preamble. What exactly did he do? Samuel took a sip of his whiskey before answering. Robbed the First National Bank in Santa Fe. Shot the teller and a customer who tried to stop him, a man named David Cooper, a friend of mine. Left behind a wife and 2 young children. Delia's expression remained carefully neutral. And you're certain it was this Dixon? 3 witnesses identified him, Samuel confirmed. He'd been seen around town for days before the robbery, casing the bank. The description matches: tall, dark-haired, scar on his left cheek. Delia swirled the amber liquid in her glass thoughtfully. When did this happen? About a month ago. I've been on his trail since. And what makes you think he came this way? Her question seemed casual, but Samuel sensed an underlying tension. Reports of a man matching his description heading southwest from Santa Fe. Last confirmed sighting was in Silver Springs, about 3 days east of here. Delia nodded, her expression unreadable. Well, as I promised, my men have been asking around. No one's seen a stranger matching that description. She hesitated, then added, but there are plenty of places a man could hide in these parts. Caves, abandoned mining camps, canyons that haven't seen a human footprint in years. Would you tell me if you had heard something? Samuel asked directly, watching her face. Delia met his gaze steadily. I'm not in the habit of harboring criminals, Sheriff, whatever you might think. I don't think anything, Mrs. Lawson, Samuel replied. I'm just trying to understand why a woman who values her privacy would invite a lawman to stay under her roof. A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, crossed her face. Maybe I just wanted the company, she said, her tone lighter. It gets lonely out here sometimes. Samuel didn't believe that for a second, but he played along. Well, I'm grateful for your hospitality, regardless of the reason. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, sipping their whiskey. Finally, Delia spoke again. Tell me about yourself, Sheriff. What brought you to law enforcement? It was Samuel's turn to be guarded, but he saw no harm in sharing the basics. I grew up in Texas. My father was a ranger. Followed in his footsteps after the war. He didn't specify which war, but the shadows in his eyes told their own story. Been wearing a badge for about 12 years now. And is there a Mrs. Rayburn waiting for you somewhere? Samuel shook his head. Never found the time for settling down. The life of a lawman doesn't lend itself to family. That's what my father used to say, Delia commented. He was a marshal in Kansas. Died with his boots on when I was 15. I'm sorry, Samuel said, understanding now her familiarity with law enforcement. That must have been hard. It was, she acknowledged. My mother moved us back east after that, to live with her sister in Boston. That's where I met John, my husband. He had dreams of the West, of building something from nothing. A small smile touched her lips at the memory. I had my father's stubbornness and my mother's practicality. Turned out to be a good combination for a rancher's wife. And now a rancher in your own right, Samuel observed. Yes, Delia agreed, finishing her whiskey. Now, if you'll excuse me, Sheriff, it's been a long day. We start early around here. Samuel stood, wincing slightly as his ribs protested. Of course. Thank you for the whiskey and the conversation. Delia walked him to the door of the study. You should have the doctor check those ribs again before you leave, she suggested. Doc Henderson comes out to the ranch every Thursday to look in on Martha's rheumatism. He could take a look at you too. I might just do that, Samuel agreed, though they both knew he would likely be gone by Thursday, pursuing Dixon once again. Good night, Sheriff, Delia said, her voice softer than he'd heard it before. Good night, Mrs. Lawson, he replied, finding himself reluctant to leave her company. That night, Samuel lay awake longer than usual, thinking about Delia Lawson. She was a puzzle, strong yet vulnerable, forthright yet secretive. And somewhere beneath her practical exterior, he sensed a woman who had known her share of pain but refused to be broken by it. It was a quality he admired, perhaps because he recognized it in himself. The next morning brought rain, a steady, soaking spring shower that turned the ranch yard to mud and kept most work confined to the barn and outbuildings. Samuel's ribs ached with the damp, but he forced himself to move around, knowing that too much inactivity would only prolong his recovery. He found Delia in the barn, checking supplies and giving instructions to the hands about repairing tack and tools while they waited out the rain. She looked up as he entered, shaking water from his hat. You should be resting, she admonished, but without much heat. Getting stiff, just lying around, Samuel replied. Thought I might make myself useful, if there's something I can do sitting down. Delia considered him for a moment, then nodded toward a pile of leather in the corner. Harnesses need mending. Think you can handle a needle and all? Samuel smiled. My mother made sure all her boys could sew. Said she wouldn't have us coming home with holes in our clothes just because we were too proud to thread a needle. Smart woman, Delia approved, showing him where the tools were kept. For the next few hours, Samuel sat on a bale of hay, repairing leather straps and buckles while Delia and her men worked around him. It was oddly peaceful, the steady rhythm of work and conversation flowing around him, the rain pattering on the roof overhead. Every now and then, Delia would pass by, inspecting his work with a critical eye before nodding in satisfaction and moving on. By midday, the rain had eased to a drizzle, and Martha's boy brought out a basket of food for everyone working in the barn. Samuel found himself sharing his hay bale with Delia as they ate thick sandwiches and drank hot coffee from a thermos. "You're not bad with a needle, Sheriff," she remarked, watching him finish the last strap. "Though I suspect your talents lie elsewhere." "I'm a fair shot," Samuel admitted modestly, "and I can track well enough. But I've always been better with people than guns. Most of law enforcement is just talking to folks, finding out what they know, what they've seen." "And what have you seen in your years wearing that badge?" Delia asked, her tone curious rather than challenging. Samuel thought for a moment. "The best and worst of humanity, I suppose. People at their most desperate and their most generous. Seen men kill for a few dollars, and others risk their lives to save a stranger." He looked at her directly. "I've learned to trust my instincts about people." "And what do your instincts tell you about me?" Delia's question was quiet, almost as if she hadn't meant to ask it aloud. "That you're a woman with secrets," Samuel replied honestly. "But that doesn't make you dishonest. We all have parts of ourselves we keep hidden." Delia held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "We should get back to work," she said, rising to her feet. "The rain's letting up, and there's plenty to be done before sundown." That afternoon, as the clouds cleared and the sun emerged to begin drying the sodden landscape, Samuel ventured out to the corral where one of the hands was working with a young horse. He leaned against the fence, watching the man gently introducing the colt to a saddle blanket, speaking in low, soothing tones. "That's Charlie's special talent." Delia's voice came from beside him. He hadn't heard her approach. "He has a way with the young horses that none of the rest of us can match." "It's impressive," Samuel agreed, watching the young man's patient work. "Takes a special kind of person to understand an animal's fear without giving in to it." "My husband was like that," Delia said, a touch of wistfulness in her voice. "He could gentle the wildest Mustang you've ever seen." "You must miss him," Samuel observed quietly. "Every day," she acknowledged. "But life goes on. The cattle still need tending, the fences still need mending, and the ranch still needs running." She turned to look at him. "What about you, Sheriff? What drives you to keep going, chasing outlaws across the territory when you could have a more settled life?" Samuel considered her question. "Duty, partly. A sense that the world makes more sense when there are consequences for those who harm others." He paused. "And maybe I'm not cut out for settled life. Too many years on the trail, I suppose. Or maybe you just haven't found a reason to stop riding," Delia suggested, her eyes searching his face. Before Samuel could respond, a shout came from the direction of the main road. They both turned to see a rider approaching at a gallop, mud splashing from his horse's hooves. "That's Tim, from the general store in town," Delia said, a frown creasing her brow. They walked quickly to meet the rider as he pulled his lathered horse to a stop in the ranch yard. "Mrs. Lawson," he called, spotting her. "There's trouble in town. Sheriff's needed, if you've still got him." Samuel stepped forward. "What's happening?" Tim, a young man barely out of his teens, was breathless from his hard ride. "Stranger rode in about an hour ago. Got drunk at the saloon and started shooting. Has Tom and a couple others holed up inside. Anyone hurt?" Samuel demanded, already heading toward the stable. "Not yet, but he's threatening to start shooting if anyone tries to come in after him," Tim reported. "Did you get a look at him?" Samuel asked, as Delia followed close behind. Tim nodded vigorously. "Tall fella, dark hair. Mean looking. Has a nasty scar on his cheek." Samuel and Delia exchanged a quick glance. "Dixon," Samuel said grimly. "Sheriff, you can't ride out with those ribs," Delia protested as he began saddling Copper. "I don't have a choice," Samuel replied, tightening the cinch despite the pain lancing through his side. "Dixon's dangerous. People could die if I don't get there fast." "Then I'm coming with you," Delia decided, reaching for her own saddle. "Mrs. Lawson, Delia," she corrected him. "And don't waste time arguing. I know these people, and I'm a better shot than most men in the territory." Samuel saw the determination in her eyes and knew there would be no dissuading her. "All right, Delia, but you follow my lead." She nodded, efficiently saddling her horse, a sleek black mare with a white blaze. "Jake," she called to her foreman, who had come to see what the commotion was about. "Get the men together. We might need backup." Within minutes, they were galloping toward town, Samuel gritting his teeth against the pain of each jarring stride. The ride that had taken 20 minutes at a walk yesterday was covered in less than 10 at their current pace. As they approached Willow Creek, Samuel reined in, signaling Delia to do the same. "We don't want to ride in too fast," he explained. "Need to assess the situation before we make a move." They dismounted at the edge of town, tying their horses behind the blacksmith shop. Samuel checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded, and saw Delia do the same with her own weapon, a well-maintained Colt that looked like it had seen use. "You know how to use that?" he asked, not unkindly. Delia gave him a level look. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 12. I've been protecting this ranch from rustlers and predators for years. I know how to use it." Samuel nodded, satisfied. "Stay behind me. Keep your eyes open, and don't take any unnecessary risks." They moved cautiously down the main street, which was eerily deserted. The only sign of life came from the saloon, where a lamp burned in the window. As they drew closer, Samuel could hear a man's voice, slurred with drink but threatening. "Next one who tries to leave gets a bullet," the voice shouted. "I'm not going back to hang, you understand? Not for anyone." Samuel positioned himself against the wall of the building next to the saloon, Delia beside him. "That's Dixon, all right," he murmured. "Sounds drunk and desperate, a dangerous combination. What's the plan?" Delia whispered. "I need to know how many people are in there, where they're positioned," Samuel replied. "And I need to get Dixon talking, distracted." "There's a back entrance," Delia informed him. "Through the kitchen. Tom keeps it locked, but I know where he hides the key." Samuel considered this. "If I can get his attention focused on the front, you might be able to get in the back and help the hostages out. Or get a clear shot," Delia suggested. Samuel shook his head firmly. "No. Your job is to get the innocent people out safely. I'll handle Dixon." Delia looked like she wanted to argue, but nodded her agreement. "Be careful," she said, touching his arm briefly before slipping away toward the back of the saloon. Samuel gave her a few minutes to get in position, then moved to the front of the saloon. "Dixon," he called out. "This is Sheriff Rayburn. We need to talk about how this ends." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of breaking glass. "Rayburn? The one who's been on my trail?" Dixon's voice was incredulous. "What are you doing all the way out here?" "Following you," Samuel replied steadily. "But right now, I'm more concerned about those people in there with you. Let them go, Dixon. This is between you and me." "Like hell it is," Dixon shouted. "I let them go. What's to stop you from putting a bullet in me the minute they're clear?" "You have my word," Samuel promised. "Let them go, and we can talk about this. Find a way out that doesn't end with more people dead." There was a pause, and Samuel could almost hear Dixon thinking it over. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," Samuel admitted. "But you know those people in there haven't done anything to deserve dying today. And deep down, I don't think you want that on your conscience." Another pause, longer this time. "I didn't mean to kill that man in Santa Fe," Dixon said, his voice suddenly weary. "The teller? Yeah, he was going for a gun. But the other fella just got in the way. Wrong place, wrong time." Samuel's jaw tightened at the casual dismissal of his friend's life, but he kept his voice level. "All the more reason not to add to your troubles now. Let these people go, Dixon." While Dixon was distracted by their conversation, Samuel saw movement at the side of the saloon, Delia guiding an elderly man, presumably the bartender Tom, and a woman in a faded dress toward safety. A young man followed them, looking terrified but unharmed. "I see what you're doing, Sheriff," Dixon suddenly yelled, and there was the sound of a shot inside the saloon. "Trying to distract me while they sneak out the back." Samuel had to keep him talking. "It's over, Dixon. The hostages are safe. There's no one left to hurt but yourself." "And you," Dixon replied, and Samuel could hear the dangerous edge in his voice. "I'm not hanging Rayburn. Not for an accident." "Killing a man isn't an accident," Samuel said firmly. "David Cooper had a wife, children. They deserve justice." There was silence from inside the saloon, then the sound of breaking glass again. Samuel tensed, wondering what Dixon was planning. Then he smelled at the sharp odor of lamp oil. "Dixon, don't be a fool," Samuel called urgently. "Whatever you're thinking, it's not too late to." His words were cut off by the whoosh of flames inside the saloon. Through the window, Samuel could see Dixon had overturned several lamps, setting fire to the alcohol-soaked wood. The flames spread rapidly, engulfing the bar and climbing the walls. He's trying to burn the place down with himself inside, Samuel realized aloud. Without hesitation, he kicked in the saloon doors and entered, squinting through the thickening smoke. "Dixon," he shouted, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. "Don't do this." A figure moved through the smoke to his right, and Samuel turned just in time to see Dixon lunging at him with a broken bottle. He dodged, the movement sending a bolt of agony through his injured ribs, but Dixon's momentum carried him forward, and the outlaw crashed into a table. The fire was spreading rapidly now, the dry wood of the saloon catching quickly. The heat was intense, and Samuel could feel sweat pouring down his face as he approached Dixon, who was struggling to his feet. "It's over," Samuel said, drawing his revolver. "Come with me now, or we both die here." Dixon looked at him through the smoke, his scarred face twisted in a grimace that might have been pain or defiance. "I told you, I'm not hanging," he snarled and lunged again. This time, Samuel wasn't quick enough. Dixon's shoulder rammed into his midsection, directly impacting his cracked ribs. The pain was blinding, driving Samuel to his knees as his revolver clattered to the floor. Dixon seized the opportunity, scrambling for the weapon. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Samuel's gun. Dixon jerked backward, a look of surprise on his face as blood blossomed on his shoulder. Behind him stood Delia, her revolver still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. "That was a warning," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The next one won't be." Dixon hesitated, looking from Delia to Samuel, who was struggling to his feet. The fire was all around them now, beams creaking ominously overhead. "We need to get out of here," Samuel gasped, the pain in his side nearly unbearable. Now, for a moment, it seemed Dixon might choose to stay and burn. Then, with a curse, he staggered toward the door, Delia keeping her gun trained on him. Samuel retrieved his revolver and followed, each step in agony as they made their way through the burning saloon. They burst out into the street just as a section of the roof collapsed behind them. Townspeople had gathered with buckets of water, attempting to contain the blaze, but it was clear the saloon was a lost cause. Dixon, wounded and defeated, sank to his knees in the street. Samuel, fighting to stay conscious through the pain, managed to withdraw a pair of handcuffs from his belt and secure the outlaw's wrists. "Garrett Dixon," he said formally, though his voice was ragged from smoke. "You're under arrest for the murders of William Taylor and David Cooper, and for robbery of the First National Bank of Santa Fe." Dixon said nothing, his head bowed in surrender. Two of Delia's ranch hands, who had arrived with Jake, took charge of the prisoner while the town's doctor was summoned to treat his wound. Samuel, no longer needed to maintain his strength, finally allowed himself to acknowledge the extent of his own injury. The pain in his side was excruciating, and he suspected his cracked ribs might now be fully broken. He swayed on his feet, and suddenly Delia was beside him, her arm around his waist, supporting him. "You damn fool," she murmured, but there was no anger in her voice, only concern. "I told you not to ride with those ribs." "Had to," Samuel managed, leaning heavily on her. "My job." "Well, your job is done now," she said firmly. "And you're going to let Doc Henderson look at you, and then you're going to rest, even if I have to tie you to the bed." Despite his pain, Samuel found himself smiling at her fierce protectiveness. "Yes, madam," he agreed weakly. The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and voices. Samuel was vaguely aware of being examined by the doctor, of stern words about reckless disregard for medical advice, and of being transported back to the Lawson ranch, though he couldn't recall the journey. When he finally regained full awareness, he was in his bed in the guest room, bandages wrapped tightly around his torso, and Delia was sitting in a chair beside him, reading by lamplight. "Welcome back," she said, setting aside her book as she noticed his eyes open. "How long was I out?" Samuel asked, his throat dry. Delia poured him a glass of water from a pitcher on the bedside table and helped him sit up enough to drink. "About 6 hours. It's just past midnight now." Samuel sipped the water gratefully. "Dixon, under guard in the town jail, what's left of it after the fire," Delia reported. "His wound isn't serious. Jake and the boys are taking turns watching him until you're well enough to transport him to Silver Springs." I should go tomorrow, Samuel began. But Delia cut him off with a sharp look. You're not going anywhere for at least 2 weeks, according to Doc Henderson. You've got 3 broken ribs now, one of which nearly punctured your lung. If you try to ride, you could kill yourself. Samuel started to argue, then saw the genuine concern in her eyes and relented. Dixon's not going anywhere, he conceded. And I suppose David's widow has waited this long for justice. Another 2 weeks won't matter. Good, Delia said, visibly relieved. Because I wasn't looking forward to having to hog-tie a lawman to his sickbed. Samuel chuckled, then winced as his ribs protested. You'd do it too, wouldn't you? Without hesitation, she confirmed with a small smile. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Samuel spoke again. Thank you, he said quietly, for the shot in the saloon. Dixon would have had me if you hadn't intervened. Delia's expression grew serious. I couldn't let him hurt you, she said simply. Not when you were only there because of your sense of duty. There was something in her voice, in her eyes, that made Samuel wonder if there was more to her concern than just common decency. The thought both unsettled and pleased him. You should rest, Delia said, rising from her chair. Martha will bring you some broth in the morning. Doctor's orders are clear liquids for a day, then soft foods as you can manage them. Delia, Samuel said as she reached the door. She turned back, her face half in shadow, half illuminated by the lamp. Thank you, he said again, trying to convey everything he couldn't put into words: his gratitude for her help, his admiration for her courage, and the confusing tangle of feelings that had begun to form during their short acquaintance. She seemed to understand at least some of what he wasn't saying. You're welcome, Samuel, she replied, using his given name for the first time. Sleep well. The next 2 weeks passed with surprising speed. True to the doctor's orders, Samuel remained at the Lawson ranch, his ribs slowly healing under the careful ministrations of Martha and Delia herself, who checked on him several times daily despite her busy schedule running the ranch. At first, Samuel chafed at the enforced inactivity, but as the days passed, he found himself settling into the rhythm of ranch life. When he was well enough to move around, he would sit on the porch, watching the daily activities, or in the study, reading from Delia's modest collection of books. Occasionally, Jake would join him, sharing stories of the early days of the ranch and of John Lawson, whose vision had built this place from nothing. And every evening, after the day's work was done and dinner was cleared away, Delia would join Samuel in the study or on the porch, and they would talk. Sometimes about trivial things, books they had read, places they had seen. Sometimes about deeper matters: Samuel's experiences during the war, Delia's struggles after her husband's death. They discovered a shared love of astronomy, and on clear nights, they would identify constellations together, their shoulders nearly touching as they looked up at the vast, star-filled sky. Samuel learned that Delia had been only 22 when she came west as a bride, educated but sheltered, and how she had embraced the challenges of frontier life with determination and courage. He came to understand how deeply she valued her independence, hard-won after her husband's death, when many had expected her to fail. And Delia learned about Samuel's childhood in Texas, his complicated relationship with his stern father, his brief but painful experience in the war, and his 12 years wearing a badge, upholding the law in territories where law was often more suggestion than rule. Neither spoke of what would happen when Samuel's ribs healed enough for him to transport Dixon to Silver Springs. It hung between them, unacknowledged but ever present, like a shadow at the edge of a campfire's light. As the 2-week mark approached, Doc Henderson made another visit to the ranch, examining Samuel's ribs with careful fingers. Well, Sheriff, he pronounced, you're healing nicely. Still need to be careful, mind you, but I think you're fit enough for light riding, provided you don't try any heroics. Samuel nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and regret. Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate your care. After the doctor left, Samuel found Delia in the barn, brushing down her mare. She looked up as he entered, and something in his expression must have told her what the doctor had said. So, she said, continuing her brushing with perhaps more vigor than necessary, you'll be leaving soon. Tomorrow, Samuel confirmed, leaning against a post. Dixon's waited long enough for justice. Delia nodded, not meeting his eyes. Of course, I'll have Jake prepare supplies for your journey. Delia, Samuel began, then hesitated, unsure what he wanted to say. She finally looked at him, her brush stilling. Yes, I want to thank you, he said, for everything. Your hospitality, your help with Dixon. I owe you more than I can repay. You don't owe me anything, she replied, setting down the brush and approaching him. You were doing your job. I just happened to be here. It was more than that, Samuel said quietly. And you know it. They stood close now, close enough that Samuel could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, the small scar at the corner of her mouth that he'd noticed days ago and had wondered about ever since. What happens after you deliver Dixon to Silver Springs? Delia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I report to the territorial marshal, Samuel replied. And then, I don't know. There's always another outlaw to chase, another town needing a sheriff. Always riding on, Delia observed, a note of sadness in her voice. Samuel took a deep breath, wincing slightly as his ribs protested. It doesn't have to be that way. Delia's eyes widened slightly. What are you saying, Samuel? I'm saying that 2 weeks ago, I was a man with nothing but a badge and a promise to keep, he said slowly. Now, I'm a man who's beginning to wonder if there might be more to life than always moving on. A smile began to form on Delia's lips, cautious but hopeful. And what would make you want to stop moving on? Samuel reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Someone worth staying for, he said simply. Delia's smile widened, and she took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. Willow Creek needs a sheriff, she said. The town council's been talking about it for months, especially after what happened with Dixon. They'd be lucky to get someone with your experience. And would the owner of the Lawson Ranch have any objections to a lawman settling nearby? Samuel asked, his heart beating faster despite his calm exterior. None whatsoever, Delia replied, her voice warm with promise. In fact, I think she'd be quite pleased to have law and order so close at hand. Samuel smiled, drawing her closer. In that case, Mrs. Lawson, I might just have to consider a change of career path. Oh, Delia raised an eyebrow, her face tilted up toward his. And what might that be? Well, Samuel said thoughtfully, I've always had a notion that ranching might suit me. With the right partner, of course. Delia's laugh was soft and full of joy. Is that so, Sheriff Rayburn? It is indeed, Mrs. Lawson, he confirmed, and then, mindful of his healing ribs but unable to wait any longer, he bent down and kissed her. The following morning, Samuel and Jake set out for Silver Springs with Dixon securely bound and mounted on a sturdy horse. Delia stood on the porch, watching them ride away, her expression a mixture of concern and anticipation. I'll be back in a week, Samuel had promised her before he left. And then we can talk about the future, our future. The journey to Silver Springs was uneventful, with Dixon sullen but resigned to his fate. When they arrived, the territorial marshal was waiting, having been notified by telegraph of their approach. Good work, Rayburn, the marshal said, as his deputies took charge of Dixon. Cooper's widow will be relieved to know her husband's killer is facing justice. That's what it's all about, Samuel agreed, though his mind was already turning back toward Willow Creek and the woman waiting there. After giving his formal statement and ensuring that all the paperwork was in order for Dixon's trial, Samuel had one more task to complete. He walked to the telegraph office and sent 2 messages, one to David Cooper's widow, informing her that her husband's killer had been apprehended, and another to the town council of Willow Creek, accepting their offer of the position of sheriff, which they had indeed extended upon hearing of his interest. With his duty discharged and his future decided, Samuel mounted Copper and turned the horse's head toward Willow Creek, toward Delia, toward home. His ribs still ached with each stride, but it was a pain he welcomed now, for it had led him to someone he hadn't known he was searching for. As promised, he returned to the Lawson Ranch exactly 1 week later, riding up the familiar path with a lightness in his heart that had nothing to do with his healing injuries. Delia was waiting for him, just as she had been when he left, but this time she ran down the steps to meet him, not caring who might see. Samuel dismounted carefully, mindful of his ribs, but eager to hold her. She came into his arms without hesitation, and their kiss spoke of all they had been unable to say during their separation. Welcome home, Sheriff. Delia murmured against his lips when they finally broke apart. "It's good to be home," Samuel replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. In the months that followed, Samuel settled into his new role as sheriff of Willow Creek, bringing law and order to the small but growing settlement. He moved into a small house in town, but spent most of his free time at the Lawson Ranch, helping with the work when his duties allowed, and courting Delia with a dedication that became the talk of the territory. Their wedding, held that autumn in the newly rebuilt church, was attended by everyone from miles around. Martha cried, Jake gave a gruff but heartfelt toast, and even Doc Henderson admitted that sometimes good things could come from patients ignoring his medical advice, though he didn't recommend making a habit of it. As winter settled over the land, bringing quiet, snowy evenings and long nights by the fire, Samuel and Delia began planning the expansion of the ranch house. "For the family we'll have someday," Samuel said, his arm around his wife as they reviewed the drawings. "Someday soon, perhaps," Delia replied with a secretive smile, placing his hand over her still flat stomach. Samuel's eyes widened in wonder and joy. "Really?" he whispered, and at her nod, he gathered her close, mindful as always of being gentle despite his excitement. "I love you, Delia Rayburn," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his tongue. "And I love you, Samuel Rayburn," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "Even if you are the most stubborn man I've ever met, riding with cracked ribs and nearly getting yourself killed." Samuel laughed, remembering the day that had changed everything. "I seem to recall saying, 'I'll ride anyway,'" he teased. "And I seem to recall saying, 'Not while I'm watching,'" Delia returned, her voice warm with the memory. "Good thing I was watching, or you might never have found your way here." "Good thing indeed," Samuel agreed, pulling her close for another kiss, grateful beyond words for the cracked ribs that had led him to his greatest happiness, and for the determined woman who had refused to let him ride away. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, while inside, by the warmth of the fire, Samuel and Delia Rayburn planned their future together, a future built on love, respect, and the promise of a life neither had dared to dream possible until they found each other in the wild, untamed heart of the West.